Have you ever wondered why the quietest person in the room often holds the most power? There's something unsettling about individuals who can sit in complete silence while chaos erupts around them. You know the type. They don't raise their voice, they don't scramble for attention, yet somehow everyone in the room seems to orbit around their presence. Has this ever happened to you? You've walked into a meeting, a social gathering, or even a tense confrontation, and there's that one person who says almost nothing, yet you can feel their influence permeating every corner of the space. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Most people mistake this silence for weakness. They assume stillness means surrender, that the person who doesn't immediately react lacks the strength to engage. They couldn't be more wrong. What they're witnessing isn't passivity, it's precision. While everyone else burns through their energy with noise, drama, and constant movement, these individuals are doing something far more dangerous. They're watching, learning, and strategically positioning themselves for the perfect moment to act. Think about the most powerful people you've encountered in your life. Were they the loudest ones in the room, constantly demanding attention and validation? Or were they the ones who seemed to possess an almost magnetic stillness, drawing others toward them without effort? The truth is that genuine power operates on frequencies most people never learn to recognize. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely change how you view social dynamics and personal influence. The ancient principles we're exploring today have been used by strategists, leaders, and power brokers for centuries, yet they remain hidden from most people who are too distracted by surface-level tactics to understand the deeper game being played. When someone chooses silence over noise, they're not being passive, they're being selective. Every word not spoken is information not given away. Every reaction withheld is an opportunity to observe how others reveal themselves. While most people feel compelled to fill every silence, to explain themselves, to prove their worth through constant verbal performance, those who understand true influence recognize that silence is not empty space. It's loaded potential. The mind that can remain still while others lose their composure gains access to patterns and weaknesses that become invisible to those caught up in emotional reactions. This isn't about being cold or calculating in a destructive sense, but about developing the discipline to see clearly when others are blinded by their own impulses. There's a reason why, throughout history, the most effective strategists understood that the greatest victories often come not through dramatic gestures or overwhelming force, but through patient observation, followed by precise, unexpected action. The person who has been quietly studying the room while everyone else performed their social theater suddenly moves with surgical accuracy that leaves no room for recovery. What we're about to explore will show you exactly how this transformation happens, and why mastering these principles might be the key to unlocking influence you never knew you possessed. If this content is shifting how you think about influence, subscribing means you'll keep developing these capabilities with every video we release. The transformation from performer to observer represents one of the most counterintuitive shifts in how power actually operates. Most people exhaust themselves in a constant performance, trying to prove their intelligence, their value, their strength through visible displays. They speak louder, work harder, push more aggressively, believing that effort and visibility equal influence. This mindset traps them in an endless cycle of energy depletion, while the real players position themselves strategically in the background. When you stop performing for others' approval, something remarkable happens behind the scenes. You begin to see the hidden architecture of every social situation. People reveal their insecurities through overcompensation, their ambitions through what they avoid discussing, their fears through what makes them defensive. These revelations only become visible when you're no longer distracted by your own need to be seen and validated. The journey from attention seeker to attention magnetizer requires a complete reversal of conventional thinking. Instead of broadcasting your capabilities, you create scenarios where others naturally gravitate toward discovering them. Rather than arguing your way into important conversations, you position yourself so that important conversations seek you out. This isn't manipulation in the crude sense, it's understanding that authentic influence operates through psychological gravitation rather than force. Your decisions begin shifting from reactive to proactive. Where others see conflict, you see information gathering opportunities. Where others feel compelled to defend their positions immediately, you recognize the strategic value of allowing misconceptions to persist temporarily. This creates a peculiar dynamic where people start attributing more power to you than you may actually possess, simply because they cannot accurately measure what you're capable of. The hidden truth is that most social and professional dynamics operate on perception layers that remain invisible to those caught up in surface-level interactions. When someone can remain calm while others become agitated, observers unconsciously assume that person possesses resources or knowledge that justify their confidence. This assumption often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as opportunities and alliances naturally flow toward individuals who project this kind of unshakable centeredness. The impact of this approach extends beyond immediate tactical advantages. Your entire relationship with stress and pressure begins to change. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by complex social situations, you start experiencing them as puzzles to be solved, patterns to be decoded. Each interaction becomes a source of intelligence rather than a test of your worth or abilities. Now, I want to go even deeper into this transformation, because understanding these principles intellectually is only the beginning. The real challenge lies in rewiring the deeply ingrained habits that keep most people trapped in reactive patterns. The shift requires developing what can only be described as psychological discipline, the ability to remain strategically silent when every instinct tells you to speak, to observe when you want to act, to create space when others are trying to fill it. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this mindset." Shift if these revelations are starting to make sense to you. The psychological discipline we've been exploring reveals its true power when you realize that patience isn't just waiting. It's active intelligence gathering disguised as inaction. Every conversation becomes a treasure trove of unguarded revelations. People speak carelessly when they don't perceive you as a threat. When your silence makes them feel compelled to fill the void with words, they reveal their priorities through what they complain about, their insecurities through what they brag about, their blind spots through what they never mention. This intelligence accumulates quietly in the background of your mind, creating a detailed map of the psychological landscape around you. You begin to understand the hidden motivations behind people's decisions, the emotional triggers that make them predictable, the desires they're not even conscious of themselves. This knowledge becomes exponentially more valuable than any obvious display of strength or intelligence because it operates completely beneath the surface of normal awareness. The transformation happens when you realize that the most effective influence never announces itself. Traditional approaches to control create immediate resistance because people instinctively push back against obvious manipulation. But when your influence operates through psychological threads instead of chains, something entirely different occurs. The person being influenced experiences your suggestions as their own insights, your guidance as their own wisdom. This requires a complete reversal of how most people approach persuasion. Instead of arguing for your position, you create conditions where others naturally arrive at the conclusions you want them to reach. Rather than demanding agreement, you plant seeds of doubt about alternatives. You don't push people toward your desired outcome. You make that outcome feel like the inevitable result of their own logical reasoning. The journey into this kind of influence demands extraordinary patience because the results aren't immediate. You're essentially becoming an architect of thought patterns, carefully constructing mental frameworks in other people's minds. Each conversation, each interaction becomes an opportunity to place another building block in this invisible structure. The person living inside this architecture never realizes it was designed by someone else because each piece feels perfectly natural and logical to them. This channel is for people who want to understand human behavior at a deeper level. Subscribe to continue this strategic education. Behind the scenes, you're operating on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, you're having normal conversations, but underneath, you're studying reactions, testing responses, calibrating your approach based on what you observe. This creates a peculiar advantage where you're playing a completely different game from everyone else, using information and insights they don't even realize they've provided. The hidden truth about this approach is that it requires you to suppress your ego's desire for immediate recognition. Your influence becomes most powerful when it remains completely invisible, when people never connect their changed perspectives or decisions back to you. This demands a level of psychological maturity that most people never develop because they're too addicted to the immediate gratification of being obviously right or clearly influential. Now, I want to explore how this invisible influence combines with emotional mastery to create something that approaches psychological invincibility. Because understanding these separate elements intellectually is one thing, but integrating them into a unified approach that operates automatically in high-pressure situations requires a deeper level of mental conditioning. Put down in the comments, "I see the invisible game now," if you're beginning to recognize these patterns in your own experiences. The mental conditioning we've been building toward requires confronting an uncomfortable reality about human nature. Most people are emotional slaves, disguised as rational decision-makers. They believe they're choosing their responses, but they're actually being controlled by whatever feeling happens to be strongest in the moment. Anger hijacks their words. Excitement compromises their judgment. Desperation broadcasts their weaknesses to anyone paying attention. This emotional reactivity creates a massive blind spot that becomes your strategic advantage. While others are being pulled around by their feelings like puppets on strings, you're developing the capacity to feel without being controlled by what you feel. This isn't about becoming emotionally dead. It's about achieving emotional sovereignty, where you decide when and how to experience and express emotions based on what serves your objectives. The transformation begins with recognizing that emotions are information, not commands. When anger rises, instead of immediately acting on it, you pause and ask what this anger is telling you about the situation. When excitement threatens to make you reveal too much, you use that energy internally while maintaining external composure. When fear tries to make you retreat, you examine whether that fear is protecting you or limiting you. This level of self-awareness creates an almost supernatural advantage in high-stakes interactions. While everyone else is being driven by unconscious emotional reactions, you're operating from a place of conscious choice. You can appear calm when others expect you to be rattled, remain thoughtful when others anticipate impulsive responses, and project confidence when others assume you should be intimidated. The journey into emotional mastery reveals something remarkable about how reality actually works in human interactions. The person who can remain psychologically centered becomes the gravitational force around which everything else organizes. Conversations naturally flow at the pace you set. Conflicts unfold according to parameters you establish, and group dynamics shift to accommodate your presence without you having to demand anything explicitly. Behind the scenes, you're essentially becoming the thermostat rather than the thermometer. Instead of simply reacting to the emotional temperature of any situation, you're subtly adjusting it through your own regulated responses. When others bring chaos, your stillness absorbs and neutralizes it. When others create artificial urgency, your measured pace forces everything to slow down to a more rational speed. The hidden truth about this approach is that it transforms every challenging situation into a laboratory for testing and refining your psychological discipline. Difficult people become opportunities to practice unshakable composure. High-pressure decisions become chances to demonstrate that you think clearly when others panic. Each test of your emotional regulation strengthens your reputation as someone who can be trusted with greater responsibilities and more sensitive information. This mindset shift affects every aspect of how you move through the world. Your decisions become cleaner because they're not contaminated by emotional noise. Your relationships become more genuine because you're interacting with people as they actually are, rather than through the filter of your reactive feelings. Your professional impact multiplies because colleagues and superiors recognize that you won't crack under pressure or make impulsive choices that create problems. Comment below, "I control my emotions, not the reverse," if you're ready to start this deeper level of psychological development. The psychological development we've been exploring takes on an almost supernatural quality when you understand how silence operates as a force multiplier in human interactions. Most people experience silence as an empty space that must be filled, a vacuum that creates anxiety and compels immediate action. This discomfort with silence reveals something profound about the average person's relationship with their own thoughts. They're actually afraid of what they might discover if forced to listen to themselves without distraction. Your willingness to sit comfortably in silence while others squirm creates an immediate power differential that operates completely below the surface of conscious awareness. The person across from you begins to feel an inexplicable pressure to speak, to explain, to justify their position even when no justification was requested. They start offering information, making concessions, revealing insecurities they would never volunteer under normal circumstances. This transformation happens because silence forces people into an uncomfortable intimacy with their own inner dialogue. When you're not providing verbal reactions or filling conversational gaps, they're suddenly confronted with the sound of their own thoughts, their own doubts, their own unresolved tensions about the situation. The revelations that emerge during these moments are often more valuable than anything you could extract through direct questioning. The journey into strategic silence requires rewiring your relationship with social validation. Most people speak because they need confirmation that they're being heard, understood, or respected. They fill quiet moments because they interpret silence as rejection or disapproval. When you can remain comfortable in that space without needing to prove anything, you're communicating something powerful about your psychological security and self-sufficiency. Behind the scenes, your silence is working on multiple levels simultaneously. On one level, it's gathering intelligence as others reveal more than they intended. On another level, it's establishing your position as someone who doesn't need external validation to feel confident about their perspective. Most importantly, it's creating space for you to observe and analyze what's really happening in the interaction without being distracted by your own need to respond immediately. The hidden truth about this approach is that it fundamentally changes how others perceive your authority and competence. People unconsciously associate the ability to remain silent under pressure with hidden knowledge or superior resources. They begin to wonder what you know that they don't, what advantages you possess that allow you to remain so composed. This curiosity often works in your favor as they project capabilities onto you that exceed what you may actually possess. The impact extends beyond immediate tactical advantages. Your decisions become cleaner because you're not rushing to respond before fully understanding the situation. Your relationships become more authentic because people feel compelled to show you who they really are rather than performing a carefully curated version of themselves. Your professional reputation evolves as colleagues recognize that you don't react impulsively or contribute unnecessarily to workplace drama. Now, I want to examine how this foundation of silence and emotional regulation combines with patient observation to create something that approaches genuine strategic mastery, because understanding these principles separately is useful, but integrating them into a unified approach that operates instinctively under pressure requires exploring how they reinforce and amplify each other. Write in the comments, "Silence is my new superpower," if you're beginning to see how this could change your approach to challenging conversations. The strategic mastery we've been building reveals its true sophistication when you realize that discomfort is not something to be avoided. It's a resource to be weaponized. Most people have an almost pathological need to resolve tension immediately. They'll say anything, agree to unfavorable terms, or make premature concessions just to escape the psychological pressure that silence and uncertainty create. This compulsion to relieve discomfort becomes your greatest advantage because you're developing immunity to the very thing that controls everyone else. The transformation happens when you stop viewing awkwardness as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as a tool that does your work for you. That uncomfortable pause after you've made a request forces the other person to wrestle with their own resistance privately. The extended silence following their initial offer creates space for them to second-guess whether they've positioned themselves competitively. Your refusal to rush into explanations or justifications puts the burden of uncertainty entirely on them. This mindset shift affects how you approach every interaction. Instead of trying to make conversations flow smoothly, you strategically allow certain moments to feel unresolved. Rather than immediately clarifying misunderstandings, you sometimes let people sit with their confusion until they reveal more about their true position. You become comfortable with being temporarily misunderstood because you recognize that premature clarity often works against your interests. Behind the scenes, you're developing something that approaches psychological invincibility. The person who cannot be rattled by tension, who remains composed while others scramble to fill uncomfortable silences, who thinks clearly while others are driven by the need to resolve uncertainty quickly. This person operates with advantages that seem almost supernatural to those still controlled by emotional impulses. The hidden truth about this approach is that it transforms your words from frequent background noise into rare, valuable pronouncements. When you speak after careful consideration rather than constant reaction, people listen differently. They assume that if you've chosen to break your usual silence, what you're saying must be significant. A single, well-timed sentence can accomplish more than lengthy explanations or passionate arguments ever could. Your decisions begin flowing from a completely different source than most people's. Instead of reacting to immediate pressures or responding to artificial urgency, you're operating from a place of calculated timing. You recognize that the right action taken too early often fails, while the same action taken at the optimal moment becomes irresistible. This requires developing an almost predatory awareness of when circumstances align in your favor. The journey into this level of strategic thinking demands that you completely redefine what patience means. This isn't the passive patience of simply waiting for things to improve randomly. This is the aggressive patience of a hunter who studies prey patterns, identifies the perfect moment of vulnerability, and strikes with precision that ensures the outcome before the target even realizes they're in danger. Now, I want to reveal how this foundation of strategic patience and tension tolerance creates opportunities for the kind of precise influence that operates completely below the radar of conscious awareness. Because these principles we've explored become exponentially more powerful when they're woven together into a unified approach. Comment. I'm learning to use tension strategically, if you can see how this changes the entire dynamic of challenging situations. The key, strategic foundation we've been constructing reveals one of its most counterintuitive principles when you realize that most people are addicted to motion without progress. They equate busyness with productivity, activity with advancement, constant movement with control. This compulsion to always be doing something creates a peculiar form of self-sabotage, where the very actions meant to demonstrate strength actually broadcast weakness and uncertainty to anyone paying attention. The transformation occurs when you recognize that undisciplined action is essentially nervous energy disguised as purpose. People who can't sit still, who jump at every opportunity, who feel compelled to respond immediately to every stimulus, they're revealing their internal chaos to the world. They're showing that they lack the psychological security to wait for optimal conditions, the strategic discipline to reject mediocre opportunities, and the emotional regulation to resist impulses that work against their long-term interests. Your journey into disciplined restraint creates an almost magnetic effect on others. While they're burning through their energy with scattered efforts and reactive decisions, you're conserving your resources for moments of maximum impact. This contrast becomes particularly pronounced during high-pressure situations where their desperation to act quickly exposes their strategy, their fears, and their limitations before they even realize what they've revealed. Behind the scenes, you're developing something that approaches strategic omniscience. The person who can observe patiently while others exhaust themselves with premature moves gains access to information that would otherwise remain hidden. You see their real priorities through what they rush toward, their insecurities through what they avoid, their true capabilities through how they perform under self-imposed pressure. The hidden truth about this approach is that it transforms your relationship with opportunity itself. Instead of chasing every possibility that presents itself, you develop the discipline to evaluate each one through the lens of optimal timing and maximum leverage. You learn to distinguish between opportunities that merely look attractive and those that align perfectly with your strategic objectives at precisely the right moment. This mindset shift affects every aspect of how you navigate complex situations. Your decisions become exponentially more effective because they're made from a place of clarity rather than urgency. Your resources last longer because they're deployed strategically rather than scattered across multiple fronts. Your reputation evolves as others begin to associate you with precision and reliability rather than impulsiveness and waste. The impact of this disciplined approach compounds over time in ways that most people never experience. Each perfectly timed action builds credibility that makes future opportunities more accessible. Each demonstration of strategic patience increases others' respect for your judgment and decision-making capabilities. Each moment where you resist the temptation to act prematurely strengthens your reputation as someone who can be trusted with important responsibilities. Now, I want to explore how this foundation of strategic discipline creates opportunities for a level of psychological influence that operates so subtly it becomes virtually undetectable, because when these principles of patience, silence, and calculated action are woven together, they create possibilities for shaping outcomes that extend far beyond what conventional approaches could ever achieve. Write in the comments, "I choose precision over speed," if you're ready to start applying this level of strategic thinking to your own decisions. The psychological development we've been exploring reaches its most sophisticated expression when you understand that patient observation isn't passive waiting. It's active. Intelligence gathering that operates like a high-resolution scanner of human behavior. While others are focused on immediate outcomes and quick wins, you're collecting data that reveals the deeper architecture of how people actually think and make decisions. This transformation requires developing what can only be described as pattern recognition on steroids. You begin noticing the micro-expressions that betray someone's true feelings about a proposal before they've even finished speaking. You identify the verbal tics that emerge when someone is bluffing or overselling their position. You recognize the body language shifts that signal when confidence is real versus when it's performance designed to mask insecurity. The journey into this level of awareness reveals something remarkable about human predictability. Most people operate from a surprisingly limited repertoire of responses and reactions. Once you've observed someone long enough to understand their patterns, their future behavior becomes almost mathematically predictable. You can anticipate how they'll respond to pressure, what arguments will influence them, and which emotional triggers will cause them to act against their own interests. Behind the scenes, this intelligence gathering creates opportunities that would be invisible to anyone operating from a reactive mindset. You begin structuring situations so that others naturally walk into psychological positions that serve your objectives. Like a chess grandmaster who sees the endgame while opponents are still focused on the next move, you're orchestrating outcomes that won't become apparent until several interactions later. The hidden truth about this approach is that it transforms conflict from a test of strength into a demonstration of superior preparation. When someone finally decides to challenge or oppose you, they're not fighting against your immediate response. They're fighting against months or years of accumulated insight about their weaknesses, motivations, and blind spots. The outcome feels inevitable because in many ways it was determined long before the confrontation began. Your decisions start flowing from a completely different source than most people's. Instead of reacting to surface-level events, you're responding to deeper currents that others don't even perceive. You recognize when someone's apparent confidence is actually compensation for growing doubt. You see when their aggressive tactics signal desperation rather than strength. You understand when their delays indicate strategic repositioning versus simple avoidance. The impact of this approach extends far beyond tactical advantages in specific situations. Your entire relationship with uncertainty changes. Instead of feeling anxious when outcomes are unclear, you become comfortable operating in ambiguous circumstances because you understand that uncertainty often works in favor of the person who can remain patient and observant while others rush toward premature resolution. Now, I want to examine how this foundation of pattern recognition and strategic patience creates opportunities for a form of influence that operates so naturally it never triggers resistance. Because when you can predict behavior with this level of accuracy, you can begin shaping outcomes in ways that feel completely organic to everyone involved. Comment below. I see the patterns now. If you're starting to recognize these dynamics in your own experiences with difficult people or challenging situations, the strategic mastery we've been developing reveals one of its most psychologically devastating applications. When you understand that your refusal to provide immediate resolution creates a form of mental pressure that most people simply cannot withstand. Human beings are wired to crave closure, certainty, and predictable responses. When you deny them these psychological comforts through patient silence and calculated non-reaction, you're essentially forcing them to wrestle with their own internal chaos while you remain completely composed. This transformation happens because uncertainty is one of the few universal human vulnerabilities that transcends personality types, cultural backgrounds, and individual strengths. The confident executive, the manipulative colleague, the aggressive negotiator, They all share the same fundamental need to know where they stand, what you're thinking, and how you're likely to respond. Your disciplined refusal to satisfy this need creates psychological pressure that builds exponentially over time. The journey into this level of strategic thinking requires you to become comfortable with being temporarily misunderstood or even disliked. When people can't get the reactions they expect from you, they often become frustrated, suspicious, or even hostile. But this emotional turbulence they experience actually works in your favor because it clouds their judgment, makes them more likely to overplay their hand, and forces them to reveal information they would normally keep hidden. Behind the scenes, you're witnessing something remarkable about human nature under pressure. People who seem completely self-assured in normal circumstances begin second-guessing themselves when their usual tactics fail to provoke your expected responses. They start wondering if they've misread the situation, if they're losing their touch, if you know something they don't. This self-doubt often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as they adjust their behavior based on imagined weaknesses in their position. The hidden truth about this approach is that it creates compound interest in psychological leverage. Each day you maintain your patient stance while others grow more anxious adds to your accumulated advantage. Each week they spend wondering about your intentions while you continue gathering information increases your strategic position. Each month they operate from uncertainty while you operate from growing clarity multiplies your influence exponentially. Your decisions start flowing from this accumulated intelligence and positional advantage. You're not just responding to immediate circumstances. You're drawing from weeks or months of observed behavior, collected insights, and strategic positioning. This creates an almost supernatural ability to predict outcomes and influence situations because you're operating from a foundation of knowledge that others don't even realize you possess. The impact of this patient accumulation of advantages extends far beyond individual interactions. Your reputation begins to precede you as someone who cannot be rattled, manipulated, or rushed into unfavorable decisions. People start approaching you differently, speaking more carefully, and revealing less of their true intentions because they sense something formidable in your composed demeanor. Now, I want to explore how this foundation of accumulated psychological leverage transforms into something that approaches genuine untouchability, because when these principles are fully integrated, they create a form of personal power that operates independently of external circumstances or other people's approval. Write in the comments, "Time is my strategic weapon," if you can see how this patient approach could revolutionize your effectiveness in challenging situations. The psychological development we've been constructing reaches its most formidable expression when you understand that true power isn't about winning individual battles. It's about creating conditions where victory becomes mathematically inevitable before any confrontation even begins. This represents a fundamental shift from reactive to proactive thinking, where you're no longer responding to circumstances but systematically engineering them to serve your objectives. This transformation occurs when you realize that most people are fighting the wrong war entirely. They're focused on immediate tactical victories while you're restructuring the entire battlefield to your advantage. They're trying to win arguments while you're making their position logically untenable. They're attempting to outmaneuver you in the moment while you've been positioning pieces for months to ensure that any move they make ultimately serves your strategy. The journey into this level of strategic thinking requires suppressing every instinct that craves immediate recognition or validation, while others are celebrating small wins and broadcasting their successes. You're invisibly building capabilities, accumulating resources, and developing relationships that will matter when the stakes become truly significant. This means enduring periods where you appear less successful, less active, or even less competent than people who are actually operating at a fraction of your strategic depth. Behind the scenes, you're engaged in what can only be described as long-term psychological architecture. Every skill you develop during quiet periods, every relationship you cultivate without immediate payoff, every piece of knowledge you acquire while others are distracted by entertainment becomes part of an arsenal that will be deployed with devastating precision when the moment arrives. The hidden truth about this approach is that it transforms you into something that approaches a force of nature rather than just another player in the game. When your preparation is complete and your position is optimal, your actions carry the weight of inevitability. People don't just lose to you. They find themselves accepting defeat before the competition even begins because some deeper part of them recognizes that resistance would be futile. Your decisions start flowing from a place of accumulated strength that most people never experience. You're not hoping for favorable circumstances or depending on luck to break your way. You've systematically created conditions where success isn't just probable, it's predetermined. This level of preparation transforms confidence from wishful thinking into mathematical certainty. The impact of this approach extends far beyond professional or personal achievements. You begin operating with a psychological security that comes from knowing you're prepared for virtually any scenario. Threats that would destabilize others become mere inconveniences because you've already anticipated and prepared for them. Opportunities that would overwhelm others become natural extensions of work you've already been doing. Now, I want to reveal how this foundation of inevitable positioning creates opportunities for a form of influence that operates so smoothly it never creates resistance. Because when people sense they're dealing with someone who has achieved this level of strategic development, their entire approach changes. Comment: I'm building inevitable success if you're ready to start thinking in terms of long-term strategic positioning rather than short-term. Tactical wins. The strategic foundation we've been developing reveals perhaps its most crucial element when you understand that emotional mastery isn't about suppressing feelings. It's about becoming the conscious director of your emotional responses rather than their unconscious victim. Most people live at the mercy of whatever emotion happens to be strongest in any given moment, which makes them extraordinarily predictable and surprisingly easy to influence once you understand their triggers. This transformation requires recognizing that emotions are information systems, not command centers. When anger rises in response to provocation, that anger is providing data about the situation, but it shouldn't automatically dictate your response. When excitement threatens to make you reveal too much or move too quickly, that excitement is signaling opportunity, but it shouldn't override strategic thinking. When fear attempts to make you retreat or avoid necessary risks, that fear is highlighting potential dangers without necessarily providing the best guidance for how to handle them. The journey into emotional sovereignty means developing the ability to experience feelings fully while maintaining complete control over how and when those feelings translate into action. You can feel insulted without responding defensively, feel excited without losing your composure, feel threatened without retreating into reactive behavior. This creates an almost supernatural advantage because you're operating from choice while others are operating from compulsion. Behind the scenes, this emotional discipline transforms every interaction into an opportunity for gathering intelligence about other people's psychological vulnerabilities. When someone tries to provoke you and you don't react predictably, they often escalate their efforts, revealing more about their own emotional state, their insecurities, and their tactical limitations than they intended. Your non-reaction becomes a mirror that reflects their internal chaos back to them. The hidden truth about this approach is that it fundamentally changes how others perceive your strength and reliability. People unconsciously associate emotional volatility with weakness and unpredictability, even when that volatility manifests as passion or enthusiasm. Your ability to remain psychologically centered while others become agitated signals a depth of inner resources that makes you appear more capable, more trustworthy, and more dangerous than you may actually be. Your decisions begin flowing from a place of clarity that most people never access because they're constantly being pulled in different directions by competing emotional impulses. You can evaluate opportunities objectively rather than through the distorting lens of excitement or fear. You can assess threats accurately rather than overreacting to minor challenges or underestimating serious ones. The impact extends beyond tactical advantages in specific situations. Your entire relationship with stress, conflict, and uncertainty changes when you're no longer enslaved by automatic emotional responses. Situations that would destabilize others become interesting puzzles to be solved. People who would typically trigger your defenses become sources of information about human psychology under pressure. Now, I want to examine how this foundation of emotional mastery creates opportunities for a form of presence that others find both compelling and subtly intimidating, because when you've achieved this level of internal control, your very stillness begins to communicate something powerful about your capabilities. Write in the comments, "I direct my emotions. They don't direct me," if you're beginning to see how emotional mastery could transform your effectiveness in high-pressure situations. The emotional mastery we've been exploring reaches a level of sophisticated precision when you understand that the goal isn't to become emotionally dead, it's to become emotionally strategic. The person who has no feelings is predictable in their coldness, but the person who can deploy emotions like tools becomes genuinely unpredictable and therefore far more influential. You can project warmth when it serves to disarm suspicion, display controlled aggression when intimidation is needed, or show calculated vulnerability when it draws others into revealing their true intentions. This transformation requires developing something that approaches emotional craftsmanship. You're not suppressing your natural responses, you're refining them into precise instruments that serve specific strategic purposes. The anger you feel becomes fuel for focused determination rather than destructive outbursts. The excitement you experience becomes energy for sustained action rather than impulsive decisions. The fear you encounter becomes information about risks rather than paralysis that prevents necessary movement. The journey into this level of emotional sophistication creates a peculiar psychological dynamic where others find it increasingly difficult to read your true state of mind. When people can't predict whether you'll respond with warmth, indifference, or subtle menace, they're forced to approach you with greater caution and respect. This uncertainty becomes a form of protection because potential adversaries can't calibrate their attacks effectively when they don't understand your emotional landscape. Behind the scenes, your ability to control emotional expression while maintaining internal awareness creates opportunities for psychological leverage that most people never recognize. When someone attempts to provoke you and receives nothing, no anger, no defensiveness, no visible reaction at all, they often begin questioning the effectiveness of their usual tactics. This self-doubt frequently leads them to escalate their efforts, revealing more about their strategy and desperation than they intended. The hidden truth about this approach is that strategic non-reaction often accomplishes more than the most cleverly crafted response ever could. Your silence in the face of insults forces the aggressor to confront their own behavior without the satisfaction of having triggered you. Your calm composure when others expect emotional turbulence makes them wonder what resources or knowledge you possess that allows you to remain so centered. Your decisions begin flowing from a place of strategic clarity that few people ever access. You can choose when to care and when to remain detached based on what serves your objectives, rather than being pulled around by whatever emotional current happens to be strongest. This creates an almost supernatural advantage in negotiations, conflicts, and complex social dynamics where others are being driven by feelings they can't control. The impact of this emotional precision extends into every aspect of how you navigate challenging relationships and high-stakes situations. Your ability to remain psychologically centered while others become increasingly agitated creates a gravitational effect where conversations, conflicts, and group dynamics naturally organize around your composed presence. Now, I want to reveal how this foundation of emotional control and strategic unpredictability creates opportunities for a form of presence that others instinctively respect and subtly fear, even when they can't articulate exactly why you seem so formidable. Comment below, "My emotions are my tools, not my masters," if you're ready to start developing this level of strategic emotional control. The strategic development we've been exploring reaches perhaps its most liberating expression when you realize that mastery over your emotional responses makes you essentially immune to the psychological manipulation that controls most people. Traditional forms of influence rely on triggering guilt, obligation, fear, or desire, but these tactics become powerless against someone who can acknowledge feelings without being enslaved by them. This transformation occurs when you understand that caring about something doesn't require sacrificing your strategic position to protect it. You can love someone deeply while still walking away if they consistently work against your well-being. You can feel loyalty to an organization while refusing to accept treatment that undermines your value. You can experience fear about a risky decision while still taking calculated action when the potential rewards justify the danger. The journey into this level of detachment requires developing what can only be described as selective emotional investment. Most people broadcast their feelings constantly, explaining their moods, justifying their decisions, seeking validation for their reactions. This emotional transparency makes them extraordinarily vulnerable, because it provides a roadmap for anyone wanting to influence or manipulate their behavior. Behind the scenes, your emotional minimalism creates a peculiar form of psychological scarcity. When you stop explaining yourself constantly, stop seeking approval for your choices, and stop broadcasting every feeling you experience, people begin working harder for access to your inner world. They start paying closer attention to the subtle cues you do provide, treating your rare expressions of emotion as valuable insights rather than background noise. The hidden truth about this approach is that it transforms your ability to walk away into one of the most powerful negotiating tools imaginable. Most people are trapped by their emotional attachments. They can't leave bad relationships because they're afraid of being alone, can't quit unfulfilling jobs because they're scared of uncertainty, can't end toxic friendships because they're addicted to familiar patterns. Your detachment from these emotional chains makes you genuinely free in ways that others can sense but rarely understand. Your decisions begin flowing from a place of strategic clarity that few people ever experience. You're not making choices based on what feels comfortable, what others expect, or what seems socially acceptable. You're making decisions based on what actually serves your long-term interests, regardless of how others might react or what short-term discomfort might be involved. The impact of this emotional freedom creates an almost magnetic effect on others. People unconsciously recognize strength in someone who isn't desperately clinging to any particular outcome, relationship, or situation. Your willingness to walk away makes others want to work harder to keep you engaged. Your indifference to their approval makes them more eager to earn it. The transformation we've explored together represents something rare in a world where most people remain trapped by their own emotional reactions and desperate need for validation. Understanding these principles intellectually is one thing, but integrating them into your daily interactions until they operate automatically, that's where real power begins to manifest. If you've stayed with me through this entire exploration, you're already demonstrating the kind of patience and strategic thinking that separates the few who truly understand influence from the many who remain unconsciously controlled by it. The concepts we've covered aren't just theoretical frameworks, they're practical tools that compound in effectiveness the more consistently you apply them. This channel exists because these insights deserve to reach people who are ready to think differently about power, influence, and psychological mastery. Every video we create digs deeper into the hidden mechanics of human behavior and strategic thinking. If this resonates with your own journey toward becoming truly untouchable, subscribing ensures you'll continue developing these capabilities as we explore new dimensions of strategic psychology. Leave a comment saying this message was meant for me if you recognize yourself in this content and you're ready to start implementing these principles in your own life. Your engagement helps this reach others who are searching for exactly this kind of deeper understanding. The like button might seem like a small thing, but it tells me we've created the kind of connection where real learning happens, where concepts don't just inform, but actually transform how you see and navigate the world. There's a video right here that takes these foundations even further, exploring how to integrate everything we've discussed into a unified approach that operates seamlessly under pressure. Click and continue with me over there, because what we've covered today is just the beginning of what becomes possible when you truly master the invisible dynamics of influence.